Imagine waking up in a world where everything humanity ever knew was suddenly gone. No books, no science, no history, just fragments, rumors of knowledge that once existed and then disappeared. Somewhere in the ancient world, a single event erased more human knowledge than any war, plague, or disaster combined. And here's the most unsettling part. We still don't know exactly what was lost. Entire sciences, maps of the world, technologies humanity never rediscovered, all reduced to ash, silence, and myth. Because what if the greatest tragedy in history wasn't a war? What if it was forgetting who we once were? Welcome back to a place where history isn't just remembered, it's re-examined. On this channel, we don't treat the past like a finished story. We treat it like an investigation. Because history is written by survivors. And survival often comes at the cost of truth. Tonight's story isn't about a battle. It's not about an empire falling to an enemy army. It's about something far more fragile. Human knowledge. The ideas, discoveries, and understanding that define who we are. And how easily they can disappear. And as you're about to see, the greatest loss of knowledge in history didn't happen slowly. It happened fast. It happened quietly. And it may have been allowed to happen. Once you understand how much was lost, you start to wonder whether history ever fully recovered. Long before universities, long before modern laboratories, long before anyone used the word scientist, there was a city where knowledge itself was sacred. Alexandria. Founded in 331 BCE by Alexander the Great, this Egyptian port city was designed to be more than a political capital. It was meant to become the intellectual center of the ancient world. At the heart of the city stood something no civilization had ever attempted before. The Library of Alexandria. Not just a building, but a mission. A global effort to collect every piece of human knowledge in existence. Ships entering Alexandria's harbor were searched. Any books on board were taken. The original texts were kept. Copies were returned. The world came to Alexandria, willingly or not. Inside the library and its sister institution, the Mouseion, scholars from Greece, Egypt, Persia, India, and beyond worked side by side. They didn't just read old ideas. They tested them. They calculated the size of the Earth, and came astonishingly close. They mapped the stars. They studied the human body. They experimented with early forms of mechanical power. Yes, even steam power. Nearly 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. And here's the part most people never hear. Much of this knowledge never spread beyond Alexandria. Because the library wasn't just preserving scrolls. It was producing new science, knowledge recorded nowhere else. The lost works of Archimedes. Mechanical treatises by engineers like Hero of Alexandria. Detailed star catalogs compiled by astronomers like Hipparchus. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some estimates say 400,000. Others say over 1 million. Almost all of them are gone. Which raises a disturbing question. How does humanity lose that much knowledge? And keep going? To answer that, we have to look at what came next. Fire. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is often imagined as a single moment. One night, one fire, one catastrophic loss. But history almost never works that way. Because the Library of Alexandria didn't die once. It died over time. And that's what makes this story so difficult to untangle. If no one knows exactly when the library was destroyed, then no one can say for certain who destroyed it. The first name that usually comes up is Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, Caesar arrived in Alexandria during a brutal civil war. Trapped near the harbor, he ordered his ships set on fire to block the enemy fleet. Ancient sources describe the flames spreading quickly. Warehouses burned. The docks collapsed. And somewhere nearby, books were lost. But was it the library itself? Some historians believe it was. Others argue that only storage buildings were destroyed. No clear record survived to settle the question. And even if Caesar damaged part of it, the library didn't disappear. It continued to exist for generations. Centuries later, Alexandria was shaken again, this time by religious conflict. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius ordered the destruction of pagan temples. One of them was the Serapeum, a major cultural center and a branch of the library. It was torn down. Statues were smashed. Shelves were destroyed. Christian writers recorded the event. But they didn't record what was lost. Which tells us something unsettling. Either they didn't understand the value of what was being destroyed, or they didn't believe it mattered. Then there's the most controversial story of all. The Arab conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century. A much later legend claims that the library was burned on the orders of Caliph Umar, who supposedly said that books agreeing with the Quran were unnecessary and books that disagreed were dangerous. It's a dramatic story, and almost certainly not true. Modern historians agree that the quote appeared centuries after the conquest and has no reliable source. So we're left with a gap that refuses to close. If Caesar didn't destroy it, if the Christians didn't finish it, if the Arabs didn't burn it, then what actually happened? Here's the explanation many historians now accept. The library didn't fall in flames. It faded. Funding dried up. Scholars left the city. Languages changed. Knowledge without caretakers doesn't explode. It disappears quietly. Scroll by scroll. Generation by generation. Until one day the institution may still exist in name, but no one remembers what it was meant to protect. And when knowledge disappears slowly, no one sounds the alarm. What makes the loss of the Library of Alexandria so haunting is not the fire itself. It's what came after. Silence. History doesn't tell us what was destroyed. It only tells us that it's gone. And that leaves us with a painful truth. We will never fully know what humanity lost. All we have are fragments. Mentions in surviving books. Quotes preserved by later writers. References to works that no longer exist. Echoes of ideas already fading when they were copied. Take Archimedes, one of the greatest minds the ancient world ever produced. He wrote dozens of works. We have only a few. One of them, The Method, was believed lost for centuries, until it was discovered hidden beneath a medieval prayer book. A palimpsest. The original text scraped away. Written over. Used. At some point, someone decided that Archimedes' ideas were no longer important enough to preserve. And if that happened to Archimedes, how many thinkers disappeared completely? We know there were texts on advanced geometry, on mechanical automation, on medicine that treated disease as a physical process, not divine punishment. There were star catalogs more accurate than anything Europe would produce for over 1,000 years. Maps of the known world, and possibly beyond it. Ancient writers hint at navigation theories that reached far past the Mediterranean. Not speculation, calculation, but no maps survive. And then there are entire fields of knowledge we can barely name. Disciplines mentioned once, and then never again. Mechanical arts that blurred the line between engineering and wonder. Chemical processes described so casually it sounds like the writer assumed everyone already understood them. Which tells us something unsettling. These texts weren't written for beginners. They were written for a world where advanced knowledge was normal. When that world collapsed, the knowledge didn't become wrong. It became unusable. A mathematical proof without education means nothing. An engineering diagram without materials is useless. A medical text without training can be dangerous. Brilliance requires continuity. And when continuity breaks, progress doesn't slow. It resets. That's why technological development appears to stall for centuries. It didn't stall. It dropped below a forgotten baseline. And the deeper historians look, the clearer the picture becomes. The Library of Alexandria wasn't unique. It was simply the last and greatest repository of a tradition that was already fading, which means the greatest loss of knowledge in human history may have started long before the flames. For centuries, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria has been framed as a tragedy of ignorance. Barbarians burning books, fanatics destroying wisdom, civilizations stumbling backward into darkness. But there is another possibility. One that is far more unsettling. What if some of that knowledge wasn't simply lost? What if it was feared? Not all knowledge is politically neutral. In Alexandria, Scholars didn't just study mathematics and astronomy. They questioned authority. They challenged religious explanations. They searched for natural causes behind events once blamed on the gods. Ancient medical texts describe disease as biological, not divine punishment. Astronomers removed Earth from the center of the universe. Engineers built machines that moved on their own. Automata that poured wine, played music, and mimicked life through mechanics. To those in power, these ideas were not harmless. They were destabilizing. Because whoever controls knowledge controls how people understand reality. In times of political or religious upheaval, ideas that threaten authority rarely survive. History shows this pattern again and again. Books are banned. Schools are closed. Thinkers are silenced. Alexandria stood at the crossroads of empires and belief systems. Pagan, Christian, later, each new order inherited the same dilemma. Which knowledge reinforces power, and which knowledge undermines it? The solution was rarely dramatic. There was no single purge, no official decree. Instead, something far more effective happened. Selective forgetting. Texts that aligned with dominant beliefs were copied and preserved. Others simply weren't. Over time, what survived appeared inevitable. What vanished appeared unimportant. But absence does not mean insignificance. It means no one was left to defend it. Seen this way, the loss of Alexandria wasn't a single violent act. It was a slow, quiet execution of ideas that no longer fit the world replacing them. And that realization forces an uncomfortable question. What knowledge do we ignore today? Because it challenges what we want to believe? There was no single scream. No global alarm. No moment when the world realized what had just happened. That's what makes this loss so devastating. Humanity didn't feel the moment it forgot. It happened quietly. Between generations. Between languages. Between collapsing institutions. Knowledge doesn't disappear when it burns. It disappears when no one can understand it anymore. After Alexandria, the world fractured. Greek faded in the West. Latin weakened. Scholars scattered. Texts that survived suddenly required translators, and when translators disappeared, meaning followed. A mathematical proof without context becomes useless. An engineering diagram without materials becomes meaningless. A medical text without training becomes dangerous. So people stopped using them. Not because the knowledge was wrong, but because it was too advanced for the world that remained. For centuries, humanity lived below its own past. Roman roads cracked, and no one knew how to repair them. Concrete formulas vanished. Mechanical knowledge faded into superstition. Medieval scholars didn't realize they were missing something. They believed they were rebuilding civilization from scratch. They weren't. They were rebuilding on ruins they could no longer recognize. Slowly, fragments began to return. Arabic scholars preserved Greek texts. Monasteries copied what they could. Renaissance thinkers rediscovered ancient ideas and called them new. Copernicus didn't invent heliocentrism. He recovered it. Medicine didn't suddenly advance. It remembered. Engineering didn't leap forward. It relearned. Which means the so-called Dark Ages weren't dark because people lacked intelligence. They were dark because the light had already gone out. The real catastrophe wasn't the loss of books. It was the loss of continuity. Once that chain broke, progress didn't pause. It fell. For nearly 1,000 years. When the chain of knowledge finally broke, humanity didn't collapse into chaos. It adjusted. Quietly. Across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, learning pulled back into isolated pockets. Monasteries became vaults. Madrasas became lifelines. Individual scholars guarded fragments of knowledge like personal treasures. Knowledge survived, but it stopped circulating. And knowledge that doesn't circulate doesn't grow. Innovation gave way to preservation. Questioning gave way to repetition. Texts were copied, not challenged. Authority replaced experimentation. Because rebuilding memory without understanding is dangerous. Still, slowly and unevenly, humanity began reconnecting the fragments. Arabic scholars translated Greek works into Arabic. Centuries later, European scholars translated those texts into Latin. But translation is never perfect. Ideas shift. Meanings soften. Entire sections disappear. What returned to Europe during the Renaissance wasn't ancient knowledge in its original form. It was a shadow. Enough to ignite progress. Not enough to restore what was lost. The Renaissance believed it was rediscovering truth. In reality, it was rediscovering fragments. Which changes how we understand modern science. It didn't rise from ignorance. It rose from amnesia. Our world isn't the peak of a straight line. It's one attempt, among many, to remember. And that realization carries a warning. If memory can break once, it can break again. Digital archives feel permanent. They aren't. Formats decay. Systems fail. Languages evolve. The lesson of Alexandria isn't about fire. It's about fragility. We like to believe that what happened in Alexandria could never happen today. We have backups. Cloud storage. Global networks. We tell ourselves that knowledge is finally secure. History suggests otherwise. Alexandria didn't fall because people lacked intelligence. It fell because systems failed. Political instability. Economic collapse. Shifting belief systems. Those forces didn't disappear. They're still with us. Today, more knowledge exists than ever before, but nearly all of it depends on electricity, infrastructure, and constant maintenance. A hard drive without power is just a silent object. A server without cooling becomes scrap. And unlike scrolls, digital knowledge leaves no physical trace behind. Archivists and historians now warn about a coming digital dark age. File formats become obsolete. Software disappears. Data becomes unreadable in a matter of decades. We may be producing more information than any civilization before us, and preserving less, which makes the lesson of Alexandria urgent, not ancient. Knowledge doesn't survive simply because it exists. It survives because people choose to protect it. The Library of Alexandria wasn't humanity's greatest failure. It was humanity's first warning. If this story stayed with you, that's intentional. Because the loss of Alexandria isn't just a moment in the past. It's a question we're still answering. What knowledge do we protect? And what knowledge do we quietly allow to disappear? If you value long-form history that looks beyond dates and names, stories about forgotten ideas, lost civilizations, and the fragile thread that connects human memory across time, then stay curious. Preserve what matters. Because the Library of Alexandria didn't die screaming. It died quietly, scroll by scroll, generation by generation. And when the last reader walked away, no one noticed. History didn't end. It forgot. Don't let us do the same.